We are taking a break from 1 Samuel. This is brought on most recently by the tragic death of George Floyd, which, along with all the other police brutality situations where there's been killings of all different kinds, and not just with police and other settings too, it seems to have culminated in this moment and brought to the surface pain and anger that normally lies just beneath the surface. And if you're not in touch with that, particularly if you live in a white culture, if you're not in touch with that, that's unfortunate. Because if you are in relationship with people from different cultures, whether Latino, African American, then you learn that there are a number of things for each of those cultures that lie right beneath the surface. And this kind of anger and pain has been underneath the surface for a long time, and it bubbles up from time to time. But now the culture is focused in a way that we have not seen in a long, long time. And I get that from many of my friends and leaders in the African American community. Something feels different, and what the hopes is that this is a moment to seize upon where progress is being made and can be made. A few years ago, we were in a similar situation. We did a series called Citizens, where we had to deal with the Confederate flag and the Emanuel 9 shooting, which is right in our back door in Charleston. And so a year and a half ago, a little time last year, we did the African American experience. And so we've been trying as a church, when the opportunities came available to us, that we see these social issues as discipleship issues and we want to enter in. And so on this weekend, there's three things I want us to deal with, I want us to think about. The first one is, what do we say as a church? And we're going to unpack that. And what do we do as a church? But then also, what do we do as individuals? And what is our response verbally as a church, the action that we take as a church, and then the action that we take as individuals? And all three of those are important. I'm grateful, cannot be more grateful. I didn't know what was happening 12, 15 years ago. I was, and some other people in our leadership, were developing relationships with leaders in the African American community and nonprofits and churches. And there were days where I was thinking, it's great to have another friend. But I'm just going to tell you, in recent years, it's become invaluable. The ways in which we've been able to, I think, serve them, and they've been able to serve us, and particularly now to give us direction. It is incredible to see what God has been doing over the last decade. And we've been real careful because most of that work we have done quietly behind the scenes. Because you may not realize this, but white folks have a unique knack for getting involved in social issues and then taking over and then taking credit for things and then actually winding up exploiting the people that they're supposed to be helping, because then when they get in the middle of something, they find benefit for themselves in it. So we have tried to be quiet and work behind the scenes, for which 2 African American pastors this week thanked me and said, we are grateful for the work that you've been doing and how your church, this church, has handled themselves. And that made me feel good. But we also agreed, for all that we are doing, which I'm going to unpack in a little bit, for all that we've been doing and we're going to keep doing, this is an opportunity to speak in a unique way. We get a chance to seize upon an opportunity to communicate with a voice of empathy and action. And so now's the time. So let me say this before we jump into those three issues. The first thing we have to be real clear on is that there's an issue in this country. There is a basic problem in our country with race called racism. It's been here from the beginning. That was part of the effort with the African American experience, was to educate our folks, some of which are largely uneducated, on how from the very beginning racism has been at the core of what we're doing. And there has been progress, but not enough, not near enough. In 1965, the Watts riots in Los Angeles happened because of a routine traffic stop where the police got abusive. Turned into 34 people dead, 1,000 buildings burned. Just a few years ago, Walter Scott had a taillight out, right? Got out of his car, felt threatened, felt abused, took off running. Policeman shot him in the back, killed him. Running away with no weapon, shot in the back. So you go, man, a lot has changed. And bro, there's plenty of evidence to show that some things have changed, but not near enough. Not near enough. This sin of racism What we have to understand in a predominantly white culture is not about a few bad apples that we have to identify and track down and deal with. It is more systemic than that. It is in all aspects of our culture. The death of George Floyd, though heartbreaking, it is a piece of a much larger destructive pie. It is emblematic of a much deeper wound that affects so many areas in our culture. And when we as white Christians to our black brothers and sisters act like it's not real or cannot engage around it, it deepens that wound. And there is profound anger and there is profound sadness at this injustice, and it is legitimate, where literally and metaphorically a group of people within our culture, nationally 13% of our culture, but who helped build this, and Bill White talked about this a few years ago, the critical role that African Americans played in building this culture for which there was no recompense. That is legitimate pain and suffering of having been literally and metaphorically pushed down. Richard Pryor was doing comedy in the 70s. He was making jokes about police brutality, and everybody was laughing. And then in an interview, they were like, man, where do you get these jokes? How do you come up with all this? He goes, man, because I'm using these jokes to draw attention to something that's actually happening. And no one believed it, except for people who lived in Compton and Crenshaw, those kinds of areas. No one really believed it, right? And no one would still be believing it, except that one thing dramatically has changed in our culture. One thing that was never intended for this thing. If the internet was the democratization of knowledge, where you don't actually have to go to school anymore, all the information in the world is available to us. You can go find whatever you want to find. You can learn whatever you want to learn. It's all available now. There is now the democratization of reality, because someone decided a few years ago we're going to add cameras to our phones. And now 300 million Americans are going to carry phones. And wherever you carry a phone, you now have a camera. And then we're not just going to be able to take picture stuff, we're going to be able to record it on video. So now we have real information in almost real time. Now every picture that gets taken, every video that gets taken comes from a certain perspective. It doesn't always tell the whole story, but we've seen it tell enough of the story. So that now, there was a time when these two people got into a disagreement and you had to choose which one you believed. Well, obviously I'm going to believe this white police officer over this black person who has a record or was doing something destructive in the moment. So I'm obviously going to choose here. Or I got to choose between what this man said and what this woman said. Obviously I'm going to choose what this man said. He has more credibility in this culture. Well, now that has changed. And now we have real information that validates what has been told to us for a long time. Please hear me on this. I am not trying to take down police officers or beat up on police in general and those who take care of us. We have police officers at all of our campuses. We are in partnership with them. Just like there are bad doctors and there are bad teachers and bad politicians, there are some bad policemen. But it does seem that there are a lot of factors that go into that. Because of the world they're working in, it's accentuated, and we have to deal with it. We can't turn our heads away from it. It's not simply about police brutality. It's about the lack of equality in education and the access to education. It's about a lack of access to good health care, to jobs, to housing. I'm late to the game on the value of housing and the role that housing plays, affordable housing plays, in the issue of race. Bill White, he was very, very intuitive. He was real clear. It took him a long time to get me clear on what that role, how central that is to the issue of race. Not just for African Americans, but for all folks who are coming through a world of poverty and that are disenfranchised. Unfair sentencing in our prison system. It's not opinion, it's not perspective. It's that there are guys that, for one situation we know, this white dude spends 14 years in prison, gets sentenced to 14 years, I don't think does the whole term, for shooting someone. Cellmates with an African American who was just in the car, was along for the ride when someone got shot, didn't do the shooting, 40 years in prison. I mean, I have two connections in prison of people who were at a drug deal when someone was killed. They did not shoot anybody. They were there. Life sentence. Like, how you get a life sentence for being in a place when something bad happened? You need something. That doesn't make any sense to me. It just so happens, the handful of guys that I know that have that sentence, none of them are white. I'm just giving you my experience. There's statistics to back all this up, but I'm giving you what we know, what we're experiencing, what we're working with. I was raised in a culture where the answer for every question, and I do come from, half of my world growing up is racist. There's no doubt about that. I've told stories in Men's Roundtable. I've told stories from our pulpit. I've talked to our leadership about where I come from. There's no question about any of that. But I was taught, and there was some good value in this, that the answer to every question is hard work. That's what I was taught. And for those that rise above it, it's because they worked hard, unless they just got lucky. For those that do not rise above, it's because they do not work hard. But by the time I got to my early 20s, that did not make any sense. It just started collapsing like dominoes. It wasn't making any sense anymore. Because I was working hard, and I believe in it. And that's why I like to work as a hobby. It is enjoyable for me. But I began to realize in my early 20s that the color of my skin had given me opportunities to work hard and to seize on opportunities that other people did not have. And I didn't just read about it, and I didn't just hear about it and podcasts on it. I actually lived it and still do live it. And we're going to have a certain element of our congregation that is going to have a hard time with some of the things that I'm saying. And here's what I want to say to you. I have a right to say this. I am right in saying it. And the number one reason that I'm right in saying that Matt Williams has privileges and opportunities that he's been able to seize upon and capitalize upon and make things happen is because of this. I am white. I'm not disenfranchised. I'm on top. I got plenty of money. I got plenty of resources. I can do whatever I want. I'm saying I'm not angry black man who doesn't have stuff, who's just trying to get. I am a white dude who has it. And now when I left my home, my wife and I became poor very quickly. But then we began to work hard, and things went our way. And I'm just telling you, because of this right here, this tells you, this validates my perspective. That if I'm a white dude telling you that I've been able to have opportunities that other people don't, it's just the truth. And so that's how it is. And if that's hard for you to swallow, you have to ask yourself this question: why? Why is that so hard for me to swallow? We'll come back to it. We do have to gain an awareness and an empathetic voice, and that is challenging for me. I'll tell you something, a number of things have helped. One of the things, Jeff Randolph and I went to a memorial. It's called the Memorial for Peace and Justice in Alabama. It's done by Brian Stevens. This is incredible. And that, more than any other book, memorial, museum, helps connect the dots from slavery all the way through Jim Crow, all the way to today, of why some things are systemic in our culture. And you go, well, that was the past and this is now. That's true. But the past is connected to now in ways that if you're the majority party in this culture, and you sit in a place of advantage, you miss the ability to connect the dots between what was and what is. It's hard. It's hard to connect the dots because you don't live it. And so the responsibility does fall upon us who are the majority, who have benefited, to be able to work extra hard to connect those dots. And you go, well, I don't feel like a racist. I'm not a racist. I don't feel like that. That could very well be true. I think that is true for most of the folks in our church. But you do have to acknowledge this. You live in a world where you have benefited from racism. Like our downtown congregation, our downtown building was most likely built in part by slaves, which were not paid. And we walk into that building all the time. And those people were never paid for that. That's just one of 1,000 examples. But that's one that's just close, that's on us. It's right here. So even if I don't feel that way, I have to recognize I live in a culture where there have been benefits that have come my way. And I've shared illustrations and stories from my family to kind of validate that before. But I can't say because it's not my problem, it's not a problem. Jesus didn't have a problem with sin. I had a problem with sin. He came to this world and he took what was my problem and made it his problem. And if we're in the body of Christ, part of our role and responsibility is to take burdens of other people. What may not be my problem is still a problem. And so then it does become my problem. And it's deep within every nation. Every nation. Most nations have had some form of slavery. There's some form of racism everywhere I go. There's a group of people who are out, who are down. That's true. This is ours. This is what we're dealing with. And it's deep within. I was working for a lady. I did the math on it just because it was important. The math is important. 27 years ago. I was working for her when I was in grad school. We were talking. And I think what had happened is we had won. I was in Dallas. So Dallas, it's the only time I ever pulled for the Dallas Cowboys when I was living there. You just couldn't help it. You would get beat up if you didn't. So we won a Super Bowl, won a bunch of Super Bowls. Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, all those guys. They're incredibly talented. They won. And there was a riot after one of the Super Bowl parties, the Super Bowl parade. And so I was working with this lady, and she started talking about it. She goes, so sad, so difficult. I can't believe racism this, racism that. It's terrible, 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 right? And she said, but the good news is it'll be over soon. Because I wasn't really listening after that point. And I said, what'll be over soon? She goes, racism will be over soon. So now I'm good. I'm in. I was like, how so? She goes, we're not, it's part of the past, and we're not a racist family. And so she pointed to her 2-year-old and her 5-year-old, and she goes, they know nothing about that. And what she began to describe, not in these terms, but she began to describe psychological, sociological theory that says that we are at the least born with a blank slate and probably born good. That was her argument. Hopefully we're born good, but we're probably born with a blank slate, and culture is what corrupts people, and because of who we are as a family and how culture is evolving to a better place, my children will never know what racism is, so they won't be able to propagate it. And so she said this, literally she said this, when my children are adults, there won't be any racism in this country. And I said, that is a nice thought. Which is the only thing I could think of to say it wasn't confrontational. And I said, but can I give you a different idea? And I started to describe what we would call the sinfulness of man, an anthropology that says that man is basically broken and sinful. And if he finds himself in a role of superiority, he will take advantage of that always. Or if he feels threatened, he will pursue in a horrible way to take down. He's always looking for opportunities to suppress and to reign supreme and to take advantage of. That's just who. And anything different that causes fear, and if I feel something's different that causes fear, I'll retreat or I'll attack, whatever. I just paint a different vision of what we would call a Genesis 3 world. And she goes, that is archaic. She goes, I'm telling you, these children will live in a world where there's no racism. Those children, I did the math, are now 29 and 33. And I'd like to say I was right. She was smarter than I am. She's more educated than I am. Vastly wealthier than I am. And she was wrong. She didn't know what she's talking about. This is a cosmic problem. But we're not worried about the cosmic side of it. We're worried about the personal side of it. I was talking to one of our members this week. Last week's running together right now. Who has adopted a number of African American children. And he needed to tell me, he's white as rain, adopted these African American children. He goes, Matt, you need to know this is not simply outside of our church. He goes, I'm a member of our church. I listen to racially insensitive comments all the time. I hear it inside these walls. He goes, and I'll admit I'm emotional right now and I'm super sensitive. He goes, and nothing overtly racist. He goes, just lacking generosity, lacking empathy, lacking kindness, not being sensitive. He goes, I am hearing it, and I'm white, I'm telling you. I was like, that's good for me to hear. His wounds are deep, they are wide. Learning to have a voice of empathy, which is not characteristic of my generation. Boomers, more empathetic. Younger generation, empathetic. My Gen X in the middle, not so much. We got work to do on that. I personally have work to do on that. I was at the African American Museum last year in D.C. And I was looking at something, reading something. There's so much information. It's too big, it's my opinion. But anyway, I'm reading this thing, and I hear these women walk behind me, and one's yelling at the other. And I was like, that sounds more interesting than what I'm doing. So I started stalking, following these two women. One's white, one's African American. It took about 10 seconds to realize they are close friends. All right, so these are close friends. But they are yelling at each other. So I keep a distance so they don't see me as stalker. That's what I'm doing. And for the African American lady, at one point she kind of wheels around and she goes, listen, you're not hearing what I'm saying. What I'm trying to say is, I don't need you to be a hero in my life or feel like you're going to solve all these problems. I just need you in this moment to acknowledge the reality that is here. That your life historically is not the same as mine. That mine may not be as bad as what it would have been 50 years ago or 100 years ago, but this is more complicated for me than it is for you. And the white girl goes, I am trying to say that. But saying it in a way that's meaningful so that someone can hear it in a meaningful way, that is complicated. And we all just acknowledge that. They're like best friends yelling at each other, trying to get to the bottom of the issue. One saying, I'm trying to say that. I recognize that. I'm trying to say it. The other one saying, I don't hear you saying that. I think that was a very healthy conversation. One that I think is rare in our culture, in our world where everybody's so fragile, no one can get emotional. No one can push back. No one can can we just work through it, get to the bottom of it, and hopefully love each other through the process? Here's our calling. Turn to Ephesians Chapter 2. There's 100 verses we could talk about. This is a good one to start on. I was working on a paper on this passage, Ephesians 2, 11 through 22. It's called Exegetical when I was in seminary. It's like 25 pages long. It's my worst nightmare. I'm working on this. I'm sitting with an African-American friend of mine. His name's Grover Cooper. I've talked about him before. And he really helped me with a bunch of race issues. But we were talking one day, and I said, man, we all so mad about y'all, right? I said, we all so mad about. And he said, because meat. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, meat. I said, what about meat? He goes, we can't get meat in our grocery stores in South Dallas. He goes, your grocery store's got meat in it. Ours don't have meat in it. I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. He began to unpack for me how complicated it is just having basic supplies for life in some communities. Can't get loans, can't get jobs. He's walking me through all that. And that was one of those turning points where he was helping me see something. Because I knew this. I did not like working at Oshman's Sporting Goods. They paid me $6 an hour. After taxes, it was like $2 an hour. And I was like, there's no money in this. I can't do this. This is wasting my time. Waste a whole Saturday making $35. I went and got some business cards, put my name on it, said I clean windows, put a phone number on it, and I walked into the most expensive neighborhoods in the country in Dallas, Texas, between Highland Park, Park Cities, and all the new houses being built in Plano. Imagine 30 years later what a $250,000 house was then, or a $500,000 house was then, what that would be worth now, or a $2 million house then, what that would be worth now. I walked in those neighborhoods and I looked at houses and I said, $75 outside, $125 in and out. And I put it on doors. And I got home and my answer machine was lit up with people saying, come clean my windows. And I just started raising the price every single time because I know what I was doing. And every once in a while, a dude would walk up to me in the neighborhood. He goes, hey, man, can I help you? I was like, no, sir, but I can help you. I want to clean your windows. But I tell you what, Grover Cooper couldn't walk through those neighborhoods. Not in a million years. He wasn't going to walk through those neighborhoods and hand out cards. It never occurred to me. I did think that guy thinks I'm suspicious because I'm dirty and tired. But I'm just going to talk my way in. I added up this morning. I worked alone in a home with over 250 women who were there alone with no man and sometimes no kids. I was alone in a house cleaning windows on the homes of for 250 women. You think a black man could have done that? No. Could not. I made $50,000 in those couple years cleaning windows part-time while I was in seminary. I graduated from seminary debt-free. When I moved to Greenville to plant a church, went to the bank to get a loan, they said, how much debt you got? I was like, none. My parents helped me pay for my college education. And then my wife and I paid for seminary. I worked hard to pay for seminary. I was Robin Hood, man. I stole money from rich people and gave it to myself and paid for school in a way that nobody in that seminary in Dallas, Texas, no black man could have done that. You go, well, maybe. I was like, all right. I'm just telling you, that's how it is. Grover broke all that down for me, helped me to see that. I was working on this passage. I'm reading it. Read along. He goes, for Christ himself has brought peace to us. He united Jews and Gentiles into one people when in his own body on the cross, he broke down the wall of hostility that separated us. So Jews and Gentiles were separated in how they worshiped God and how they related socially. He did this by ending the system of the law with its commandments and regulations. He made peace between Jews and Gentiles by creating in himself one new people. One new people from the two groups. Together as one body, Christ reconciled both groups to God by means of his death on the cross, and our hostility toward each other was put to death. And so, it is a new people group. And that the hostility between, this hostility toward each other, that was also put to death. We are reconciled to God. So it's a new people group because we're reconciled to God and we're reconciled to each other. Now part of the same family. Does that take away every single cultural distinction about what you like and what you feel and how you... No, there's still cultural distinctions. We'll deal with that on a different day. But there should be no hostility between us. And I'm working on this passage, and you get 25 pages. And seminary don't care nothing about application. But there was a section at the very end of what you might do as a result of 25 pages of technical study on Greek language, whatever. And I said, Coop, do you think, it's so embarrassing. I said, do you think that this passage, this breaking down between Jews and Gentiles who hate each other, who have to come together and be in peace, you think this can have any implications for race between black and white people? He put his face in his hands. He was like, oh my gosh, Matt. It's a seminal passage on that idea. Matt, it's so blatantly obvious. I mean, and it got so clear to me, just the other world that I live in and that I think about compared to what he's thinking about. And it's interesting. He's the oppressed party trying to think about how to be reconciled. Right? I'm the one guy, I'm not thinking about that. I don't feel disenfranchised. It's not part of my worldview. So let's be clear about this. When we're thinking about who we are as a church, as God's people, when we're thinking about that, we are talking about that we have to be, and I don't mean just in our local church, those that are in the body of Christ, whether they're in America, China, Russia, South America, India, Africa, anywhere in America, believers who are in the body of Christ, in our church and around the world. There should be peace between us. There should be justice between us. There should be righteousness among us. There should be equality among us. There should be care for each other. This is how we as the body of Christ live with each other. When part of us are alienated or pushed down, literally or metaphorically, when someone is pushed down, it is our job to be the first to bring about justice by lifting up, to be merciful, by swooping, by engaging, by condescending, by coming to that, by joining in that moment. Here's what I think is confusing. And as I hear a lot of folks talk about it, pastors, Christians, other people, there is some amount of confusion around this idea of justice, which we've dealt with in the past. We'll deal with it again. But there's a little confusion. The scriptures are real clear. The prophets, major prophets, minor prophets, New Testament, Old Testament, that's how we live within the context of this church. That's who we're supposed to be. That's who God calls us to be. But we do not have the ability to bring the kind of justice and mercy and kindness and generosity that we demand inside our church. We can't demand that outside. We can't force that into being outside because those are not God's people. And so when someone says, we're going to bring justice to this world, I'm like, the scriptures already tell you that we're not. The scriptures are real clear that we're not going to do that. We're going to try. I'll say that in a second. We're going to try, but we're not bringing, because that's why Jesus has to come back with a sword coming out of his mouth, because he's like, you bunch of failures. You rejected everything I ever told you, everything I ever did, everything I ever wanted for you. So Jesus comes back with a sword coming out of his mouth, and all this corruption, all this brutality, all these dictators who just oppress and hurt people, all of that gets wiped out. It gets dealt with. That's why Jesus has to come back. He did not give us that kind of authority. He did not give us that kind of power. We do not have the ability to bring that kind of justice to the world. So be careful when you say the word justice and make sure you know what you're talking about. Because we can't control the culture and we can't force it into our version of justice and kindness and mercy. But here's what we can do. And Tony Evans says this so clearly. We can live it in a way that is compelling so that the people in the world look at our church and go, that's a better way to do it. That is compelling to me. That is who we want to be. And here's the thing. And we can go out into the culture and we can find those that are marginalized and broken and we can try to lift them up. We can totally do that. And with a government that is Rome, but America, whatever you want to call it, right? It's a non-Christian government. That's what it is. We can ask, we can demand, we can protest, we can vote, we can run for office. We can become lawyers and judges. We can become politicians. We can do all that to try to bring about change, and that's great. So, I want to have that piece done and clear. Let me talk about response a little bit. First thing is, when we think about response, we're talking about deeds and we're talking about voice. But before we talk about the voice of the church, here's the concern. And this is going to be confrontational. All right? I'm just giving you a heads up on it. The idea that we talk about things without acting has become prevalent from my perspective in our culture. Not just among the young, among everybody. We are a bunch of talkers. How I feel and what I think and what ought to be without a lot of action to back that up. This issue is not going to be moved. The needle's not going to be moved. We're not going to deal with this with just talk. Our church has worked for years behind the scenes on what is called social justice. I'm not sure that's the best term for it, but social justice. Intentionally not trying to talk about it or draw attention to ourselves. Because of what I said earlier, white people have a knack for going in, taking over, and taking credit. And then exploiting the people they're supposed to be helping. As one African-American pastor told me this week, he goes, and white people aren't the only ones who are doing that. So he's frustrated with what's going on in his own culture. And Donald Spann helped me yesterday. Some of our pastors were meeting, and I just expressed, I said, I feel bad because there are people that have challenged us and said, I don't think you're talking about this enough. I don't think you're talking about it well. We'll take that criticism. And Donald Spann said this, African-American pastor on our staff. He said this yesterday. He goes, I think what has happened is what was supposed to happen. I do not think we were supposed to be talking about all this 3 to 5 years ago in this way. I think now is the time. I feel something's different. My family in Charleston feels like something's different. I think now is the time, and this is the best thing. He said, I got a word, and I was like, man, give it to me. And he goes, here it is. He goes, here's what's so critical, that 5 years ago, 8 years ago, we were working on this, and nobody was looking. He goes, and what's valuable about that is that means that's who we are. And I was like, whew, I can sleep tonight before I go rip everybody tomorrow. Is that we are talking about it now. And I know there are people who are frustrated that we don't talk about it enough, and I hadn't talked about it more before this. But I do think that's a true statement. We were working on this 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. We went to Allendale. We've been working on this quietly when no one was looking, and no one seemed to care, and no one was applauding us, and no one was celebrating. And we still don't want that to happen. We just want to make a difference. And the reason we were working on it then is the same reason we're working on it now. It's because this is what we believe. It's what we believe the right thing is. It's what we think the scriptures say. Whoever gets credit and whatever it takes to move the needle, we want to be a part of that. But I do want to say, talking about it is not enough. And let me get real specific. The fact that you get on Instagram and tell the world what you think and what you feel, and then when you've done your post, or you repost something that someone else said, or you retweet something that someone else said, and then you feel satisfied that you have done something, I want to tell you that I do not believe you have accomplished much of anything for the kingdom when you do that. I'm not saying you shouldn't post what you think and feel, but I'm saying if you think that once you have posted something, you have accomplished something, then you have not been living in the real world with anything sinister for very long. You have never met a giant. You have never dealt with a really difficult issue to think that you can just talk about something and that's magically going to make it go away. And on top of that, the tenor and the tone of what I see on social media is now we have millions of people telling everybody else what they should do. So you have a bunch of generals in a war walking around screaming out commands, but there's nobody to actually carry out the work. Do you understand that concept? This is what I think they should be doing, and this is what's wrong with this, and that's what they should be doing, and that's wrong, and that's what they should be doing. It does not take a genius. We really only need a couple people telling us what's wrong and what ought to be done. And the rest of us just ought to get to work doing whatever they say. We don't need everybody telling us what's wrong. I mean, how many people can be in charge? We have millions of people who think they're in charge. And they just need to get to work. And I'll tell you what's more valuable than that. And we're going to go way over time. I just don't care. Right? Got to get it done, man. So, one of our leaders in our church that I happen to be close to a couple years ago, he owns a company, has some guys working for him, some white, some black. Another company came in to help him with something. I can't remember the detail of what they were doing. Guy working for the other company pointed to an African American who worked for our leader and made a racial, it wasn't overly negative, but it was a racial slur about that. I wasn't trying to be derogatory. He was trying to actually give him a comment, but it was a racial slur about that man who worked for a guy that's in leadership in our church. It incensed this guy. He got furious, but he calmed himself. He's an emotional dude. He reined it in. He didn't say anything. Went home, called me, called a couple elders, called a couple people, and just said, hey, here's what happened. I got to go deal with it. And I was like, I want you to deal with it, but I'm very concerned. He goes, what are you concerned about? I said, I'm afraid you're going to hurt somebody. I'm afraid you're going to get down there. You're going to confront them. They're going to say something stupid, and I don't know what you're going to do. And he goes, I'm not going to do anything bad, but I got to go deal with it. So went to the place of business, did not talk to the guy who did the racial thing, went to the owner of the company, said, hey, this is what your guy did. This is what he said. He goes, I just need to know, is that who you are? Is that your business? Is that what y'all are doing? You good with that? The guy said, no, I'm not good with that. Go out, meet with the other guy. The other guy apologized, said, I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Is that sincere? Who knows? Not my job. Not his job. I mean, I don't know how you're going to get in someone's heart and figure out what's sincere and what's not. What matters is that in that moment, what could have been to his disadvantage, this man took a stand and did the right thing. Let me tell you something. That is far more valuable than anything that anybody posted on Instagram that day. Because racial reconciliation and social justice got done where one man had to look across the desk at another white man and say, that is not right. I will not stand for it. This has to change. Someone got put on notice that day. Whether their hearts changed or not, who knows? But he knows now, they're part of our culture ain't good with that anymore. And now that believer got to model, this is what living for Christ really looks like. I've had it in my own family. Had to tell my dad. I was like, Dad, in this complicated world, man, because there are things about him. He had two African-American guys that worked for him. He paid for their kids to get medical care numerous times. So he's in heaven, I believe, and he's looking down. He's like, you tell the whole story. I ain't got time to tell the whole story, but I'm just telling you, you did some good things on that. But his language, terrible. And finally, one day, it just got more acute to me as my kids got on the scene. I just said, Dad, you can't talk like that. I confronted him a handful of times. I said, you can't talk like that. You can't say that. You can't say those words. Bible this, theology that. I explained it all to him. I laid it out for him. He kept doing it. And then one day I just pulled him in the back bedroom. I was like, hey, man, you can't talk like that. He goes, why are you trying to put your law on me? I was like, I'm not putting law on you. This is what's right. So we got in a huge argument about it. And I wasn't winning. And I enjoy winning. I wasn't moving him. I said, well, here's how it is, bro. I said, I can't bring my kids here anymore. You don't see your grandkids. He goes, you serious? I said, by any means necessary. Let me just say, quoting Malcolm X to my dad was probably not the best idea. But he goes, all right, fair enough. And so he did. But I mean, I got to make a decision. I got to figure out who I'm following in that moment. You go, well, man, you got family. But that's not my family. They come and ask Jesus, hey, your mother and brothers are here. He's like, who are my mother and brothers? It's those who do the will of my Father. Those are my mother and brothers. I'm surrounded by my mother and brothers. So if my mother, my brother, my sister, they don't want to follow Jesus, sorry. There's going to be division in this family. Got to do what's right. We're following Jesus. It's a new family. It's a new order. It's a new decision. It's a new way of living. So we got to be able to give voice to this. And it is apparent in some ways that my voice and maybe our voice as a church has not been clear enough, not been loud enough. Now, I'm going to get a bunch of emails right now. They're coming through that we have not been loud enough and clear enough about abortion. I already know 800,000 babies will be aborted in America this year. I already know the facts. I used to work in the pro-life movement. I'm good. Sex trafficking, we're not loud enough. Domestic violence, women getting beaten in our state at one of the highest rates in the country. I hear you. And maybe we're not talking enough about all that. But what we are, and we talked to Will Plunk this week in Charleston about this issue, that race is a discipleship issue, and we're all trying to figure out how we teach people how to think and how to work through all that. We are working on it. But what's clear on the voice side of things, our black brothers and sisters need to know that we see this as sin, even if we don't fully understand it. We see it as sin, and we stand with them. And I want to say, just like Instagram, if you listen to this sermon or any other sermon, and that makes you feel good, like you've done something, I want to rebuke you right now and tell you hadn't done anything. Do not let this sermon, because I'm saying the things that I'm jumping through hoops that you want to hear, make you feel good. That's not what I'm doing. We've been working. I went to Allendale 10 years ago, right? I mean, we got people in our church who are laying it down week in and week out in our prisons, mentoring African-American kids in after-school programs. We got people putting it down. So we're not trying to gain anybody's approval, but if hearing something makes you feel good, then you need to know that you are vulnerable to being deceived about what change looks like. I'm going to say it again. If hearing this sermon or any sermon or reading an Instagram post makes you feel good and makes you feel relieved that you've done your part, you are vulnerable to being deceived about what change in a Genesis 3 world really looks like. You are missing it. Because we do need to be vocal. But we also have to take action. Our church, the kind of work that we are doing on the deeds side of things. We want to do justice here first. We want to be salt and light. We want to do it in our body and then let that shine to the world and go out into the world and do things. And so, if I'm understanding it correctly, we are spending this year a little over $2.2 million on ministry that goes outside our doors to help people who are disenfranchised and who are marginalized. $2.2 million. It's actually $2.284. That's what I was told. When we add it all up, those numbers look right to me. A large portion, even a majority of that, the folks within that marginalized bracket are African American. It is the kind of work that we are committed to. I did not want to say that because it sounds like I'm trying to gain your favor. It sounds like I'm trying to prove myself to you. When an African American pastor in this town this week, I said, Stacy, man, I said, this is complicated for me. I said, I don't want to earn anybody's approval. I don't want to prove myself, especially to a bunch of young folks coming out of college who've yet to do anything. I said, feeling like I have to prove myself to them, that is frustrating. He goes, man, I'm going to tell you something, bro. He goes, I've been around this thing a long time. He goes, I have yet to find an organization doing what Grace Church is doing, black or white, nonprofit or church. I ain't seen anybody doing it. He goes, y'all aren't perfect. He goes, and now is the time to bring more voice to it. He goes, the work y'all are doing, he goes, there's nothing like it. And between Donald and Stacy, I was able to sleep last night thinking about it. A year or so ago, we put together the African American Experience. If you'll go to this website, you go all the way to the bottom, then there's a list of the things that I'm talking about, the $2.2 million, things that we're putting our hands to, that we're doing, that come from our church. And so if you want access to that we'd love for you to have it. Something happened a couple years ago in our culture, and I called not Stacy, another guy, and I just said, hey, African-American pastor, I said, hey, this thing keeps happening. This is so frustrating. I said, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? What do you want me to do? He goes, I don't know, Matt. I said, you want to do a worship service together? He goes, can we not? This is what I was thinking too. He goes, we're good with you. You're good with us. Your people in general are good with us. He goes, I got racist people. I got some people, most of my people are good with you. They're not good with other things. He goes, we're good. We're at peace, man, working together. He goes, what we need you to do is cut us in on the economic side. Hire African-American owned businesses to stimulate our economy so we can get caught up in the bigger economy and produce resources and wealth for our people. And personally, I took that on. I was like, all right, I know a bunch of people. I'm gonna put my hands to that. I can work on that because I love that kind of work. We, as a result of that conversation, we took not directly, but over time, we took $250,000 of our savings, because we have to keep a certain amount of savings for the loans that we have. And we put it in, there's one African-American bank in the state. It's in Columbia. I think it's called Optus. They had a name change, but I think it's called Optus. We put $250,000 in that bank to be able to say, hey, African-owned business, we want to support that. And we're trying to find other ways as a church, and individuals in our church are doing that. Not just the church, but individuals. We started an organization, it's a nonprofit outside of us now, a number of years ago, to give loans, low interest or no interest loans to entrepreneurs who were unbankable, not bankable. Most of those are African American. That started at Grace Church. We started something called Mill Community Ministries, which has their hands on a whole number of issues and challenges facing our city. That was birthed at Grace Church. Brainchildren of Jeff Randolph, over and over. We are partnering with Jumpstart, giving them money every year, trying to disciple people on the inside, legitimately disciple them, working with real believers, and then discipling them and mentoring them when they get out of prison to help them find transportation and jobs and be able to make an income so they do not go back to prison and they find a new life. Some of those will become believers. Most of those are believers. We're trying to let that venture beyond even people who are not. In the world of education, we are mentoring children and students to try to give them direction and an opportunity for a new life. In Allendale, last few years, we've done a summer camp, which has now led to a place where we have 6 interns in Allendale this summer, who most have been with us 4 years, one only 1 year. But those 6 interns are now leaders helping lead the camp, getting paid by our church as interns. They had to apply through our HR department. Do you know how few African Americans in the poorest county in our state have ever had to work with an HR department and learn what it takes to fill out an application, answer these questions, produce this information so that you can go to work and get a job? That's what we were trying to do. That's what we were giving ourselves to. We think it's important for changing the next generation. About $40,000 was given to two churches in urban settings to help remodel in the last couple of years. We helped another church pay off their debt. They were so grateful. I was like, won't you help us pay off our debt now? Working with Homes of Hope and a few African American churches to create not subsidized housing, affordable housing. It's affordable housing. Right? It's critically important if we're going to help people move into a new level and a new sustainability, a new form of a kind of life that is sustainable and that has energy to it, that is not just survival. We were helping some African American churches pay for their interns this summer. They saw our intern program, and he's like, "How do you get that? How do you do that?" We're like, "Well, here's how we did it." And like, "We don't have resources for that," so we're like, "Let's help you do that." That becomes part of their leadership development. Fostering and adoption, we talk about that all the time. 1/3 of all the kids in DSS are African American. Families in our church have adopted over 40 African American children. COVID donations, we've been able to channel that into the African American community. Both African American pastors I spent time with this week, one guy's done 12 funerals in 2 months. The other guy, I was like, "How many funerals did he?" He goes, "More than normal," because I haven't been keeping track. He goes, one of his best friends just died this week of COVID. So let me just say, we have people that are frustrated with wearing masks. I understand that. We got people worshiping at home. We got people worshiping outside. We got people in here with masks on. I get that. It's complicated for Americans. My rights, my freedoms, what all this means. I understand all that. But what we're doing is not trying to obey the government on wearing masks. What we're trying to do is protect people. And when I walked into an African American church this week, let me tell you, how I was received with all this, that attitude was very different because they got people dying. I was like, "Are you sure all those are COVID?" He goes, "They were alive 2 months ago, and now they are dead." He goes, "Here's how many funerals I did last year. Here's how many we're doing right now." He goes, "We don't have good enough health care. We can even get determined what all these deaths are about." I'm just telling you, my world's not the only world we're living in. Your experience is not the only experience out there. It doesn't take long to find out there's different experiences. We have people connecting. I said the $2.2 million. What's more important than that is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers serving in ways that are incredibly important. All the way down to one group of families helping replace some flooring this past week for an African American family. It is by doing these kinds of things that we help bring justice and mercy to those who have been pushed down. So what's your response? The first idea is this. If you could see the number of books and articles and podcasts that are in my inbox right now, boy, white people love them some resources. Matt, you got to read this book. Matt, you got to read these 7 books. Matt, you need to listen to these 14 podcasts. Matt, look, here's a list of articles for you to read. I was like, oh my goodness. We love to talk and read and think and share, right? That's fine. You will learn some things that way. But here's the main application that white folks at Grace Church need to do. You need to get into a relationship with someone from a different culture. It does not have to be African American. Our Latino culture is getting ready to be bigger than our African American culture, and they got their own challenges. You've got to be in a relationship with someone who is different than you are. And my African American friends are like, man, you know, in the upstate, we're only 18%. You're going to wear us out. We all got to be in a relationship with like 5 white people. Every time we turn around, we're suffering. Like, I hear you. I don't know what else to tell you. When Grover Cooper leans across the table and explains it to you, you'll get it. You don't have to read a book. When someone tells you their story, or tells you what happened at the bank, or tells you what happened in school, or tells you what happened in college, or tells you what happens at their job, when they walk you through it, you live it with them, then your voice and your life becomes empathetic to that. Last time I'm going to say it. Posting stuff on Instagram is not going to get it done. Go sit down with someone. Enter into a relationship. The second one is you got to learn to serve and be proximate. You got to be in the mix where things are happening and see it, feel it, and experience it. Be like, oh, this is how this goes. Oh, this is how this works. Try to get dinner in Fairfax, South Carolina. Nothing open. No restaurants. Nothing open. It's almost a food desert, man. Right? You got to go, right? I mean, you got to go. You just got to experience it, man. You got to get into some places where you serve and you feel what other people feel. You see what they're experiencing in their world. And so you got to get in relationship and you got to go serve. And some of that you can do through our church, but most of that you need to do on your own, in your neighborhood, at your workplace. And then the third thing is you need to protest, man. It's a great thing. In most countries, you go protest, they'll just kill you. I do think we have a group of people who forget that. Most countries, you go, we're getting killed here. No, I'm saying, like, in most countries, like, you protest anything, everybody just gets wiped out, right? So we can protest. We can write letters. We can march. We can go to law school and become lawyers. We can become judges. We can take people to lunch and hear their story. We can work in our neighborhoods. We can mentor someone in prison. We can mentor a student. We can have dinner in our homes. And one African-American pastor said, man, don't put too much pressure on your people. But if they'll come help us protest, we won't get shot so much. He said, like, when y'all are with us, they just don't throw as much tear gas and they're not as quick to shoot and do that kind of stuff. Or just push people around. He goes, when y'all are mixed in the crowd, they just don't, it's just a different environment when y'all protest with us. I was like, all right, I'll tell everybody. Protest. But here's what I'll tell you about, all right, I said that was the last thing I was saying about Instagram. I'll say one more thing about Instagram. When you do get on Instagram, instead of telling everybody what they ought to do, and instead of telling everybody what you feel and retweeting what someone else feels and thinks, here's what you do. Tell us what you did that day. Say, here's who I ate lunch with. Don't say their name. Say, here's what I did. Here's the student that I'm mentoring. Here's the prisoner that I'm discipling. Here's the letter that I'm writing. Instead of telling us what you think and what you feel and then telling everybody else what they should go do and how crazy everything is, we're pretty clear on all that. Just tell us what you did that day, what you're doing, what you're planning on doing, what your small group's doing, what your students are doing, what your family. Tell us what you're doing. And then the culture will be like, man, these people are getting some stuff done. And it'll be so grassroots, it'll be so powerful, can't stop it. Just like the government in China can't stop Christianity because it's so grassroots. It's too spread out. It's too powerful. It's too person to person. It's too life on life. You couldn't stop it if you had to. If you killed 500,000 Christians in China, it wouldn't really change that much. It's just there's too many underground doing the work. We belong to a different nation. We are not Americans. We are waiting for the holy city to come down. We belong to that world, and this world is against what we are doing, and we are subverting it in a grassroots way until Jesus comes back and says, nice effort, but let me show you how to bring justice. Let's pray and let's worship. Father, we got work to do. We got work to do in our souls. We have over-identified with this culture and in its comforts or in what we think it ought to be. And so, Father, would you lead us now? Would you speak to us? Would you show us where our feelings and our beliefs are wrong? Would you show us where our actions are wrong? Would you show us where our voice of empathy needs to grow and where we need to articulate to our brothers and sisters that we are with them? Would you show us the work that we need to put our hands to, not just what we say, but what we do? Where what we wish we could do for everybody and what we wish we could do on a global scale, we go ahead and do it for one today, in this moment. Our thinking gets transformed, our beliefs get transformed, and someone else's life starts to get transformed because we give ourselves to it. And as we come to a place where we take communion, we remember that you died for us, that we were all part of one body together, and that is where justice and mercy was accomplished for us. We get to worship and remember that and share in it with others. We ask that you lead us now in Jesus' name.